On this episode of The Lost Years Part 3, I'm going to talk about how I enjoy the process of creating comics and, of course, a little bit of animation. So, stick around. Hey, folks, welcome back to The Rajiv Show, and I'm your host, Rajiv Doreswamy. And this show, I want to reach out to those who are currently struggling in life and to remind you that life is indeed beautiful when you're inspired to make it your own. This is season 2, Life in India, and this is the ending of the three-part series known as The Lost Years, and it's comic books and animated life. But before we get into this episode, I just want to remind you, if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe and click that notification bell for every time my new episode is published. And of course, if you're tuning in from Spotify, don't forget to click that follow button and send some love. Send some love. We all need love. Let's get on with the show, shall we? So, the first topic we're going to talk about today is, of course, comics. Now, we all love comics. From Marvel to DC, let those two folks fight it over. We still love it. And the step process of creating comics is fun. It's exhilarating. And as a creative, as a young creative, I still enjoy going through and reminiscing about the processes that I've learned throughout the last years. And these are the four things that I know of in comics. And if I missed out something, do leave it in the comment section on YouTube. And starting off, we talk about the writer. The writer's task is, of course, to create this story, and his job is to paint a picture where he creates this how this world works, how this world operates, and he conceptualized that in a textual form. And then, of course, once the writer is done with the process, he takes the written comics into the penciler. And now here's the fun part about the penciler. The penciler creates the world with the use of course, a pencil. And as the penciler creates the world, he illustrates how the writer wants a particular character or a particular environment, or and then of course they come up with panels. So there are different standards to how comic book are made. Some people, they use a huge vellum board, and some people use short bond paper. It depends on what medium you are using it. So of course, with that in mind, once the writer and the penciler get together, they create panels. They do the thumbnails, of course, the numbers of pages, what characters are doing per panel, and then of course once that process is done, they take it to the inker. Now here's the fun part about the inker. The inker creates the outlines for the character. So it's just basically tracing over the penciler's work, but to add in, he adds in the shadows and the extra details, like if the shadow is coming in from above, so the where does the light create that shadow, and how much darkness will that shadow have over the character and all that stuff. That's an amazing thing. And of course they use ink pen or Indian ink. Some people, they use paintbrush, and some people use ink pens. And then of course once that process is done, they scan the ink works. Now in the digital age, they scan the ink works, and then they send it over to the colorist. The colorist, that's also a fun thing, because a fun experience, because the colors give life to the black and whites. Of course, there are some comics. in the market, which they do not have, um, they do not have actual colors, which is interesting in itself. But of course, life isn't fun without colors, i- if you agree with me. So once the colors is done, of course, that's how comic book is created. You print it out and then you mass produce, and then of course you sell it. The process, the step process I have experienced is so fun, and the most challenging task of it all is basically not starting, because you're always overwhelmed with so many ideas. You cannot put it in a you cannot put it i- in a dish where you can make it happen, like make you can actually see it tangibly happening. So I guess this is an encouragement for those who are artists, who have enough experience, who are listening and tuning in. This is a shout out to you guys for hustling and creating your own content, and I do respect that. So now, comic book life is done. Let's talk about animation. I spent uh, two, two, or- two, 2 years, I think. Huh. Sorry about that. 2 years from 2010 to 2013. And the animation has the of similar process of creating characters, but in a more different way, because now you're adding in the 2D and 3D dimension over in the digital space. And of course, the beginners for animation is, of course, concept art, where you draw, same thing as a penciler's job, to create and illustrate the idea. And then of course, you have two ways to go about when it comes to animation. If you're a character designer who likes to create stuff like Tom and Jerry, of course you're in the 2D space. And in the 2D space, you're using two dimensions, which is uh, it of X and Y, which is of course using only the 2D flat surface. But when you are in the 3D space, this is where things get interesting. 3D space, I'm sure everybody is inspired by the Tintin movies. That is 3D, and of course, with the Avengers and all the other VFX, that is also 3D, but that is more uh, grand, more technically difficult thing. Now I'm just talking about the basic stuff. In 2D animation, of course, you begin with a concept, and then of course you take that concept into Flash. So that's where you convert your your concept into digital space. And then the most important thing about 2D is, of course, the 2D space. You have to never forget your physics, and when you're creating characters, of course, the biology and the physics, they come into play, like how a person's expression when they throw a ball, and how the ball moves from point A to point B. There's a stretch, and then once it touches the ground, there's a squash that creates that dynamic that makes it interesting. Now, with all the physics, there are a lot of stuff aside from the squash and stretch principle. There are a lot of other principles that you can tune into YouTube and learn. And then, of course, let's get into the 3D aspects. 3D is fun because you get to uh, experiment with three dimension. As I mentioned earlier, you have X and Y. In 3D, you have X, Y, and Z. So if you have two lines, if you're visualizing the graph, if you've done statistics, the graph, you have X and Y. Z is the line that falls away from X and Y, which creates that third dimension. If you understand what I'm saying, uh, thank you. And that third dimension is what creates that dynamic, and that's how you come up with animated objects. And the process, of course, as usual, is concept art through sketch. And then, of course, you take that to a modeler who creates the character and fleshes it out. And just like uh, just like taking a clay, you create this beautiful model, and then you have the model, and that's just another part of animation. Now, once you're done with that, you hand it over to the texture guy. I don't know what they're called, but they add textures to the model. So let's say you created a male model, or a male model, of course, with the details like the jacket, the color of the jacket, the stripes of the jacket. Of course, the texture guy adds the texture to the character, and of course the skin color, the hair color, all basing it from the sketch, the concept art. Then once the texture is done, they add bones, and then they add the ligaments. It's interesting. It's like creating a human being out of scrap, out of digital scrap interface, which is pretty cool. And then once you're done with the bones and the muscles and the features, that's where you come up with the final 3D animated character. So 3D also falls into another area, which is the environment, which is another job for concept arts as well. But this is more huge because you're creating space between a huge area. So it's more like building a world outside of course, the outside of your imagination, and it's challenging because if you're creating an environment, let's say like perhaps woods, of course the details in between the bark of the woods, and how the modeler has to create the details are very intricate. And then the leaves and the falling, if there are falling leaves, and then that's the beauty of why animation is such an awesome experience that you should try if you are getting into animation. So those are the two things that I want to talk about: comics and animation life. And it's a fun experience. It's the longest relationship that I've had, and of course, the life lessons that I learned from drawing is, of course, the basic rule of all is be patient with yourself, improve, criticize yourself, but use that as a fuel to improve on your craft. Hey, folks, I just want to add into this wonderful episode a plug for my blog where I talk about the life lessons you can learn in art. It's a short read, and it would be nice for you to check it out. I'll leave the link in my YouTube channel, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you can share this with your friends, because I do like to encourage creative folks, young creative folks, to keep creating their craft, and I want to encourage them to be inspired to do what they love. Folks, if you're looking for an amazing collection of Philippine podcasters, head over to the Philippine Podcast Directory, where you can find hundreds of podcasters, and the topics are varying from inspirational to life lesson, and of course my show, the Rajiv Show. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will see you in the next episode. Stay safe, folks. Cheers.